right, guys, stay tuned, and we're going to tell you the difference between a realtor's market analysis and an appraisal.
You better get fired up.
Happy Monday, guys. How you doing? Hopefully you had a great weekend. Today we're going to go over something that I hear a question asked about all the time. And I don't know if I've ever done a video on this, to be honest, but it's really, what is the difference between, it's called a CMA, a competitive or comparative, I've heard both used, market analysis, right? A CMA. And that is what a realtor would typically do when they come to your home as a seller, or honestly, they should be doing for you as a buyer before you put an offer in, to determine the value of a property, okay? An appraisal is very similar, but it's done by a licensed appraiser, and it's got a few more restrictions to it. There's a few more rules with what they need to do to fit guidelines, and there's a reason for that, right? So with an appraiser is going to come in and they're going to find the closest comparative sales that they can. They're trying to be as close to the property as possible. If it's in an HOA, they're trying to be in that exact HOA. They're trying to be in the last 3 months. If they got to extend to 6, they will, but they try not to. They try to stay, within a mile or a half mile or whatever the restrictions force them to stay within. And there's certain have-tos. They have to meet certain standards or they're not allowed to use certain comps. And the reason is because they've got to send that off to, usually, not always, sometimes it's just, hey, Bob wants to know what his property's worth, but sometimes they got to send it off to a lender. So now the lender knows, hey, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I'm lending on a property out in Florida and I have no clue what that property's worth. And, the realtor, they're a salesperson. The lender, they're a salesperson. We need an appraiser, somebody who's making a flat fee, not a commission, to tell us what that property's worth. So they hire that person, or I should say the buyer hires that person, to do the appraisal and then send it in so they know exactly what it's worth, right? So as long as that appraisal's at what we're doing price-wise or higher, we're good to go. If it comes in a little bit lower, we've got some challenges. But that's typically what an appraisal is used for. Now, you can get an appraisal also if you want to do certain renovations, or if you're getting a HELOC, right? A home equity line of credit. Or I've seen it before where mom and dad pass away, and of the 3 kids, one of them wants to buy the home, and they're going to pay equal amounts to the other 2 kids. Well, how much do we pay? Okay, so maybe you get an appraisal for that. So now the property is worth $300. Okay, well, we each would have gotten $100,000. So, well, yeah, we would have each gotten $100,000. So I'm going to give you 100 and you 100, and my 100 will be, I just get the home at a discounted price. I get it at 200 instead of $300,000. There's a million ways to do that too, but that's an example, right? Now, a market analysis is traditionally used by a realtor when you're coming in and asking what your home is worth in a listing presentation. So that's where I'm going to do very similar things, honestly. But we don't have a license to do this. Our license allows us to sell residential property. It could be commercial as well. But you're not licensed to do an appraisal. So we do a comparative market analysis. Very, very, very similar. However, there are a lot of realtors who, 71% last year sold 0 homes. So you've got to be very careful who you're asking to give you valuations of your property. This is not, a $500 to $1,000 phone, or it's not a $40 mug. I can't believe these are $40. You're talking about a 6-7 figure property. You want somebody who does a lot of these consistently, especially in the last 3 to 6 months, because markets change. But we're going to look at the same things. I live in Bedford Park. If I'm going to value my home, I'm trying everything I can to stay within Bedford Park, okay? But sometimes you're going to have challenges, and I'll give you an example of challenges. You might go into Bedford Park, and there's only 1 sale in the last 6 months. Well, that home could have undersold by $30,000. It could have oversold by $30,000. I'd like a few more comps so I can feel confident with what it is I'm going to price it at. So if I've only got 1, that's kind of scary. Or maybe I've got 3 or 4, but I've got a pool and none of them have pools. So now we got to decide, okay, what is the value you add on for a pool? Okay, and the appraiser's doing that too. We're looking at, typically what I'm looking at is all the homes in Port St. Lucie that are single family homes that are, say, give or take $50,000 of where we think we're going to be price wise, that are in HOAs. What did those with a pool sell for, and what did those without a pool sell for? What were the 2 averages? What's the difference? That's roughly what a pool's going to be worth. Now, maybe my pool's got more bells and whistles, or maybe it's got less bells and whistles. Maybe it's beat up and it needs to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Resurfaced, right? That's going to be expensive. So that's definitely going to take down the value. You've got to look at a lot of different things, and all those things should be taken into consideration. I'm also looking into, when I do a comparative market analysis, I'm looking at the perspective of a typical buyer. So you might look at crown molding, and an appraiser's doing this too. You might look at crown molding and say, man, all the crown molding throughout my home costs me, I don't even know what that costs, $4,000. Joe, how much does it add to my value? I can tell you 0 of the buyers that I've ever sold homes to, hundreds of buyers over the years, have ever said, we're going to go with home B. Why home B over home A? Because it has chrome molding, and that's very valuable to us. I've never heard that. Now, it does look good. It certainly adds attraction. But is there a number we can put on that? Probably not. And if so, it's going to be very small. It's certainly not going to be $4,000. Okay. And I see a lot of little things like that. And you can argue with some of the things I'm saying if you're an appraiser or a realtor, but plantation shutters, they look really nice. But when I look up the difference between those with and those without, I don't see any true valuation differences on them, right? Where I will see a difference, and you got to be very careful valuing properties and remembering this, is you might see that homes with plantation shutters versus homes without plantation shutters are selling for $5,000 more on average. Okay, cool. But you've got to look at what is the price per square foot, because maybe people with 3,000 square foot homes tend to get shutters more often than people with 2,000 square foot homes. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean the shutter is what's increasing the price. It might be the size difference that's increasing the price. So you've got to think of that too. So you want to take out as many of those different variables as possible when you're doing this research. But again, none of this is perfect. It's just putting in a ton of work to get as good and strong and confident an answer as you possibly can. All right. So I have people come to me that this is the most common thing where they'll ask me, I just had one call me. This is why this idea came up for this video, and said, hey, it was that exact situation. Mom and dad just passed. All the kids want to sell the home to one of the siblings, but we don't know how much to sell it for, and we don't want to pay an appraiser the $500 they're requesting or whatever it was. Will you do an appraisal? I said, well, number one, I can't do an appraisal. I'm a real estate agent, but I understand what you're asking for. I get the intent. Really, you just want a confident number. Yes, I can get you that in a market analysis, but all the siblings, including the one who's going to buy the home, has to be okay with that. If they're not okay with that, then, you know, why even invest in me doing anything for you? However, when that sibling buys the property, assuming they're going to be financed, you're going to get an appraisal on the property anyway. So you could do a market analysis yourself, and you could get it under contract, and you could put something in the contract that says, if the appraised amount is higher or lower than the sales price by, pick your amount, 20 grand, then we're going to redraw up the contract to fit that new price. Now, people might not like that. Maybe the sibling buying is saying, well, if it's 30 grand more, I don't want to buy it. Okay, well, write in that clause. Okay. And maybe if it's 20 grand lower, there's a sibling who's like, then I'm not selling it. Okay, well, then write in that clause, right? You can write in those things, but you can write that into an agreement before you do it. But yes, if you want a simple, easy valuation on a property, and it's not needed for, what's the word I'm looking for? Not professional, but formal reasons where they have to have an appraisal. Because if they have to have an appraisal and I give you a CMA, they're probably not going to take it. But if it's not a have to, then absolutely we can help you out. So there's the major differences between an appraisal and a CMA. But again, very, 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 very similar depending upon who's doing them, right? And listen, I'm giving realtors a hard time because 71% didn't sell a home last year, but the same is true in the appraisal world. And appraisers will tell you that. There's phenomenal appraisers, and there's not so phenomenal appraisers. Any industry, wherever it is you do, there's great people in that industry. There's not, right? So really do your homework and figure out who it is you're working with before you invest your dollars in getting something from them. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. We're here every single Monday with What's Hot at 11 o'clock, where we'd love to see you every single week. So come back next week. We'll see you then. Have a good one.